Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to talk about ancient Rome, and we are focusing specifically on government and law. The reason we focus on government and law in Rome is because a lot of their ideas we use today in some shape or form. And sometimes we took and kept it exactly as it is, and other times we changed it up. So we're going to start out talking about law first, and then we'll get into the structure of the Roman government and look at how it's similar to ours. So here we go. Now, before we begin, we should look at kind of the history of what happened. A lot of influence in Rome by different groups, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Latins, and so their culture is kind of a blend of different ideas that come together there. 600 BC, we have the Etruscans become the kings in Rome. And Rome grows from a small village to a large city. And so you have kings there, which would be a monarchy. Between that and 509 BC, so for about 100 years, you have various kings ruling. And in 509, the wealthy Roman landowners, the aristocrats, take over. They overthrow the king and they create their own government. And so these are the wealthy landowners. At first, they're in charge, and they become a republic where people begin to have some say in their own government. And so we're going to look at these different forms today a little bit later. But first, we'll start with the law. So here we go. Now, the Roman Empire was the end result. And you can see all the areas in yellow, red, and green they controlled at one point or another. But it started out with just this little bit in Rome, and then it expanded to all of Italy, and then it expanded to this massive empire. But that didn't happen overnight. So we're going to start with Roman law today. Now, making laws. Now, if you're watching this at home and you're doing the online version of the worksheet, as we go along, there'll be some questions that you can answer. So make sure to look at those questions ahead of time and do your best to answer those. You can look at the Roman comparison chart that we have between the United States and Rome. That might help you with some of the answers as well when we get specifically into government. For now, we'll go through the information, and as always, contact your teacher if you need some help. Laws in Rome were based off of reason and not religious beliefs. And so the big question there is, what does that mean and why is it important? Well, when we look at reason, it makes sense. It's logical. Okay, for example, what they're saying is if Rome had a law that said you cannot kill another person, it's not because that's something that you find in the Ten Commandments. It's because it's logical that you shouldn't kill other people. And so that's how their laws were made. And why is that important? You can decide for yourself, but obviously we normally like it when people are logical. Now in Rome, there's two groups, and we've talked about this a little bit. You have the patricians and the plebeians. And there's a struggle between these two groups because the patricians have a lot of money and a lot of wealth, and their life may be a little easier, whereas the plebeians have to work really hard for a very small amount of money or maybe out of work altogether. And so these groups really have a struggle with one another. So here's how that power is split up. The patricians are the top, the plebeians are the middle, and the slaves are the lower class. Very much like we saw in Greece, there are a lot of slaves in Rome. They're pretty common, and they have very few rights, if any. Now, the patricians are your wealthy landowners. They're the nobles that own the land. They're the ruling class. They can vote, pay taxes, serve in the army. They could not marry someone from the lower class. So you literally have this divide between the wealthy and the poor in that way. And the patricians do get to serve in the government. On the other hand, the plebeians make up the majority of the population. They're your people working with their hands, your craftsmen, your shopkeepers, your artisans, small farm owners. They could vote. They could pay taxes. They could serve in the army. They could not marry the upper class. That was not allowed. But they could not serve in the government. And so while you may have some voting rights, you can't vote for somebody like yourself. You have to vote for somebody who's rich. And obviously some people won't like that too much. So what does this do? Well, the patricians get all the power. They control the government. And the plebeians do not have any important government positions. And so for the plebeians to gain these rights, which they do gain some in the end, they have to really work for it and push the patricians to change. So, patricians in power. Originally, the wealthy made the laws. And the laws were not shown to the average citizens, which obviously upsets them. So think about, why would that be? Why would you as an average citizen be upset if you didn't know the laws? So you're going down Highway 63, let's say, and you're going 55 miles per hour because that's the speed limit it's always been. You're pulled over by a police officer and he says, hey, the speed limit was reduced to 35 miles per hour. Here's a $300 ticket. Would you be happy? Right? So the laws were not shown to the average citizens. The plebeians obviously didn't like this too much. And so the result is the plebeians go on strike because they want more of a say in government. They leave their farms, they leave the army, and they sit at the forum. The forum was kind of like this place where you had a marketplace. It had religious temples. It's where government leaders were, things like that. And they demand a change. And they get it. And what's passed is called the 12 Tables. And these are the rules and the laws that Romans must follow. And the laws were harsh, but they were equal. And so whether you are rich or poor, technically the law applies to you. So how do you feel about this? How do you feel about a system where laws might be harsh, but they're equal for all people regardless of income? It's an interesting thing to think about. So the 12 tables, what were they? They were the written law. And so you could go in the forum and see them. And if you could read them. They showed the viewers some of their rights as citizens. They showed the viewers how the law worked. And so people could actually see them, and they were applied to all Roman citizens. So think for a second, the plebeians, the lower class, why would this calm them down to now have the 12 tablets etched in stone of sorts so that they could see them? So the government that the law is going to be a part of is the Roman Republic. And a republic is a government type where the people get to choose officials who represent them. The United States has a republic. We're a democratic republic because we, the people, get to choose our representatives. And so that's what they had for a period of time in Rome. That will change over time, and emperors will take over. But the highest form of government in Rome was the Senate. And the wealthy patricians, landowners, were part of the Senate. And so that's kind of how things operated in Rome. And as Rome grows, it becomes an empire. And you have an emperor who has complete control as a lawmaker, and they get to make all the rules. So the question is this good or bad? Let's go back to those plebeians. Do you think they're happy that there's one emperor that makes all the rules? Does that upset them? How about the patricians? Do the patricians like having the emperor making all the rules? Are there situations where that might be good? There's obviously situations where that's bad. So one person making all the rules, that's what happens in the end with the Roman Empire before it begins to collapse. Crime and punishment, really interesting stuff. Sentences for those found guilty were more about vengeance than correction. When we think about vengeance, you want to get back at somebody for the evil that they did to you, right? And so maybe somebody makes fun of you, so you want to punch him in the face. That's vengeance. Correction is making it better. Instead of punching them in the face, you teach them that that's wrong and that hurts people. Well, that's not what Rome was about. They were about vengeance. And so what does this mean? Well, I just explained it to you. And how would it change punishments? Think about that for a second. There are some countries in the world that follow specific religious laws where if you are caught stealing, they'll cut your hand off. Yikes, that's vengeance there. So think about what it might mean if you kill somebody. Well, vengeance would say what should happen to you. We're going to look at some of the laws in Rome, and I think you're going to find that it's very different than the United States because of these ideas. So you have very severe punishments compared to the United States. And a lot of this goes back to the Romans didn't have a prison system. They had jails, but if you're in jail, it just housed you until they killed you. So think about the United States if we had no prisons. What do you do with the thousands of people that we put in prisons? How do you punish them and try to stop them from doing that in the future? Well, as you can see here, part of the way the Romans did was by killing some people. So think about how it would change our country. Pretty crazy. Unfortunately, this wasn't a fair system. A lot of times, wealthy Romans were able to escape death penalties by paying large sums of money or bribing officials. And some citizens lost citizenship. If you are found guilty of a crime, they might kick you out and you can't come back. Or you're sent into an exile. They send you to live in a place most people don't want to live. So do these things happen in the United States? Do people get kicked out of the country so they can't live here anymore? Can wealthy people pay off things to get out of debt? Now, for the most part, wealthy people can't pay off judges. That doesn't happen a ton. But what advantage do wealthy people in America have when it comes to crimes and being found not guilty that maybe poorer people don't? That's something to think about for that question. American connections when it comes to law. Well, our current day jury system has its roots in Roman law. We have a jury trial system where you have jurors from your city that decide if you're guilty or not. That's from the Romans. We talked about the Greeks had that too. And then a few of these ideas. Let's take a look at these. Number one, tell me what you think. All people have equal treatment under the law. So whether you're wealthy or not, you're supposed to have equal treatment. Now, it didn't always happen in the Roman Empire, but do you like that idea? Is that a good thing? You are innocent until proven guilty. So if you're going to be thrown in jail, it's because they've proven you guilty. What if that was flipped around? You're considered guilty by the courts unless you can prove you're innocent. How would that be? The burden of proof rests on the accuser. That means that if the government is saying that you killed somebody, they have to prove that you did it. And so you don't have to prove innocence. They have to prove you're guilty. And if they can't prove you're guilty, then you're free. Unreasonable laws can be set aside. If the law no longer fits with the situation, you can throw it out. So interesting things. Do you agree with them or not? Now we'll move on to the government and how the government operates. Okay. So when we look at Rome, we talked about they have a republic where citizens elect representatives to make decisions, and the representatives served in a governing body called the Senate. Is this similar or different from the United States? Do we have representatives that serve, that were elected by us? Do we have a Senate? Now, voting. Not all Romans were citizens. Slaves were not citizens. Foreigners were not citizens. Women were considered citizens, but they could not vote. And so is this similar or different from ancient Greece? When you look back, you know, did you see that slaves and foreigners couldn't vote? Do you see that women couldn't vote in ancient Greece? Now look forward to our country today. Is this true today that, you know, this is how voting works? Obviously, we have some changes. What are those changes that you see? So we're going to talk about the power structure a little bit and how that operates. And you're going to see different levels. The consuls will be at the top, the Senate will be second, and then the assembly. And we'll talk about each branch in a little bit here. So in some situations, the Romans had one person that was a dictator. That was rare. It wasn't supposed to happen much, but it changes once we get an emperor. And they have two men that were consuls who kind of led the government. They had 300 men that were the senators, and then the rest of the population fit into the assembly. So we're going to look at each of these different branches. Now the Senate. I love that the word is Latin for old men. That's kind of funny. They weren't all old men, but some were. This is the main governing body, and it only allowed patricians. And this is really how Rome was run when it was a republic, a democracy of sorts. You had 300 men that were chosen for life. So these 300 guys, they get to be in the Senate until they die, if they can, which is pretty crazy to think about. That's powerful. They need to advise the councils. A council is somewhat similar to a president. And so they have to tell them what they think the government should do. They have to deal with international issues. How do they deal with other countries and what's going on there? They propose new laws that they feel should be passed. And they approve of public works. Maybe they're going to make some new roads in Rome, or maybe they need to build a dam or some aqueducts to bring water in. They're in charge of all these things. And they just deal with daily government problems, whatever it might be. If they had the COVID-19 like we do, the Senate would be trying to figure out what they should do back then. So think about our Senate and look at that government comparison chart if you need to. How is our Senate similar and how is it different from how it was in ancient Rome? The next group are the assemblies. There's two different assemblies. The first one is the Centuriate Assembly. And this is made up of citizens, soldiers who are members for life, mainly patricians at first, and then it changes. So the soldiers' assembly, the Centuriate Assembly, they made laws. And if we look back here, the Senate proposed them. Well, the Centuriate Assembly makes the laws, and they select the councils. So they're pretty important because they get to choose the two leaders who are the most powerful in the country. Now, the tribal assemblies, they were made up of the plebeians, the lower class. And that was kind of based on where you lived. Members were grouped. And they got to make local laws, and they got to elect what are called tribunes, and we'll talk about those. And so this is a little bit more of the common people. It's not necessarily just the wealthy. And so what do you think this is more similar to in the United States? President, House of Representatives, the Senate, the courts. What do you think? So how the Roman Republic works, here we go. The highest level you sometimes had, they didn't always have this, is the dictator. The dictator could be chosen by the consul in an emergency to rule with total control over the government. So if they had a situation, maybe a war, where they wanted one person to have all power so they can make quick decisions, they could do that and appoint a dictator. But the stipulation was, the rule was that you could only be a dictator for 6 months, and then you had to give that power back to the government. So when you think about that, why have this? Why have this temporary all-powerful ruler? And would you want this to happen in the United States? How about right now? Making this during the season when we have the coronavirus. Would you want one person with all complete control during this time with the coronavirus? Would that be good? Would that be bad? It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. So now, normally the highest level were the consuls, 2 patricians, upper class, who manage the government and the army. So they're the ones that are really running the government. Now, normally they do what the Senate wants. They only serve for 1 year, so their power is pretty limited. And one consul could overrule the other. So they had the veto power. And so if one consul says we're going to war and the other one vetoes it, you're not going to war. If one consul says there's a new tax and the other one vetoes it, you're not going to have the tax. So they had to be able to work together or nothing would get done, which is kind of interesting. So think about, who in America does this compare to? Is the consul most like a senator, a representative, the president, a Supreme Court justice? What do you think? And how are they similar and different from that person in that position based on what you know? So consuls are normally the highest. Then, as you know, you have the senators. They discuss important issues. Only patricians could be senators. Here's something to think about this. The wealthy part. You have to be a wealthy member of society to be a senator. Imagine today if I said to you, look, you can be a government leader, but you have to have at least $1 million. How would you feel if that's how America was run? You have to have money to be a government ruler. Now, do a lot of government leaders have money? Absolutely, they do. But there's others that don't have much money at all. Everybody's a little bit different in that regard. So how would you feel if you could only be a government ruler if you had a lot of money? Is that fair? Is that right? What do you think? So we have dictator every once in a while. Consuls are the highest level. Senators are next. And then there's tribunes. Now, tribunes are plebeians who get a say in government. Each year there were 2 to 10 of them. They work in the Senate. And they didn't have a whole lot of power, but what they had was important. So these plebeians in the Senate could stop something from happening by vetoing it, yelling, "I forbid." And then that action is stopped. What's interesting is they can't add things. So if they want to increase the amount of food the government gives to the people, they can't do that. But if they want to stop a war, they may be able to. So the tribunes don't have a lot of power, but they do have a little bit. and it shows now that the lower class has a little bit of say in government. Our American form of government comes from the Roman Republic, and that's why a lot of people still study the Roman government today. And so that's one thing you can learn from the past, is that we always take ideas from people before us, whether we realize it or not. And America was no different. Our democracy was kind of a concoction of a lot of different ideas from the past, brought together with new ideas as well. So that's the basics of the Roman government and law system. If you need any help, let me know. You can always look at that Roman government comparison sheet as well. Take care.